The Galactic Council Chamber was a marvel of architecture, a floating citadel of diplomacy suspended in the cold void of space. It was where the most powerful races of the universe gathered, where empires were born and fell, and where wars were decided with words instead of weapons. For centuries, humanity had fought to earn its place among the elder races. Against all odds, they had climbed from being dismissed as a primitive, warlike species to holding a coveted seat at the council. They were the youngest race ever admitted, a race of survivors, innovators, and, some would argue, troublemakers. But now, in a single vote, everything had changed. The chamber was filled with the murmurs of alien delegates as the ruling verdict was announced. The Speaker of the Council, a towering insectoid being with shimmering golden carapace, clicked its mandibles as it read the decision aloud. By unanimous vote, the human species is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council. Effective immediately, all human embassies and representatives are to be recalled. The Terran coalition is stripped of all diplomatic privileges. Silence followed. A silence so thick it felt like the vacuum of space itself. Then a slow, sharp exhale cut through the stillness. Ambassador Julian Carter, the highest-ranking human in the council, stood frozen at his podium. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edges. He had expected resistance, maybe even sanctions, but complete expulsion? This was a declaration of exile. His voice was cold steel when he spoke. On what grounds? The speaker's multifaceted eyes blinked in unison. Humanity has displayed repeated acts of aggression, territorial expansion, and defiance of council decrees. Your race has proven itself disruptive to the galactic order. Julian scoffed. Disruptive? He looked around the chamber at the gathered species, some with fur, some with scales, others with bioluminescent flesh that pulsed like a heartbeat. We bled in your wars. We traded fairly. We honored our commitments. And now you cast us aside because we refuse to be subservient? A reptilian delegate from the Orc Dominion let out a low hiss. Humans do not follow the Council's will. They build weapons beyond our restrictions, colonize planets outside their assigned zones, and interfere in conflicts that do not concern them. Julian's jaw tightened. We defend ourselves. We defend those who are too weak to fight for themselves. His gaze swept across the room, landing on the representatives of races that humanity had helped liberate from oppression. The Ashari, the Vorthans, none of them spoke now. Fear ruled them. The speaker made a dismissive gesture. Your presence disrupts the balance. Therefore, it is decided. The decision is final. Julian's breathing was steady, but his blood boiled. He had spent a lifetime working to keep humanity in the Council, believing diplomacy was the path to survival. But now he saw the truth. The Council had never wanted humanity as equals. They wanted humans in chains or not at all. Slowly he straightened his suit, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles. He looked up at the assembly with calm defiance. Very well, he said. Humanity will leave. The speaker nodded. Then the matter is settled. Julian turned to go but stopped at the threshold. He glanced back over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. You think you've won today, that by pushing us out you've contained us. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the chamber like a distant thunderstorm. You don't realize what you've done. A pause. You have just freed humanity from every treaty, every limitation, every law that bound us. Silence fell over the chamber once more. Julian gave a slow, sharp smile. Now, we decide our own fate, and soon, we'll decide yours. With that, he walked out. The Council had cast humanity aside, thinking they were cutting off a problem. They had only created their greatest threat. Julian Carter stepped onto the shuttle that would take him back to the human embassy, though after the Council's decision, it was no longer an embassy, but just another building waiting to be seized. He barely noticed the polished floors beneath his boots, or the cold efficiency of the ship's interior. His mind was elsewhere. As the doors sealed shut, his aide, a sharp-eyed woman named Lieutenant Sarah Kwan, folded her arms. That went about as well as expected. Julian exhaled sharply. I should have seen it coming sooner. The signs were there, the restrictions, the constant votes against us, the so-called sanctions. This wasn't a trial, it was an execution. Sarah leaned against the bulkhead. So what now? Julian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out of the viewport as the shuttle disengaged from the Council station. The endless black of space stretched before them, but it no longer felt like the void of exile. It felt like a frontier. Finally, he turned to her. We go home. We tell them exactly what happened. His voice hardened. And then we prepare. Sarah raised an eyebrow. For what? For the moment, the Council realizes they just made the worst mistake in galactic history. The return to Earth was met with outrage. The broadcast of the Council's decision spread like wildfire across the colonies, the megacities of Terra, and the outer human settlements. The news wasn't just about expulsion, it was about betrayal. The politicians were furious. The generals were livid. The people? They were beyond anger. For years, humanity had played by the rules, believing they could prove themselves. They had bled and sacrificed, thinking they could earn respect. But the moment the elder races felt threatened, they had cut humanity loose like an inconvenient problem. That was their first mistake. Within days, the Terran Coalition's leadership convened in a war room deep beneath Earth's surface. It was an emergency session, but unlike past diplomatic meetings, this one had no talk of negotiation or reconciliation. President Evelyn Ward, a woman known for her ice-cold pragmatism, stood at the head of the table. The Council thinks they've contained us, she said, voice measured but firm. They believe that by exiling humanity, they've defanged us. I say we prove them wrong. Across from her, Admiral Tobias Grant, a grizzled veteran of the Orion conflict, let out a low chuckle. They wanted us to stay in our lane. I say we build our own damn highway. Julian leaned forward. The Council relied on us. Our technology, our industrial might, our willingness to innovate where they feared change. Now, they think they can do without us. He let the weight of his words settle. They're wrong. The room was silent for a moment. Then, Evelyn nodded. Then it settled. We will no longer abide by Council treaties, trade restrictions, or military limitations. She met the eyes of every leader in the room. From this moment on, humanity does not answer to the Council. We answer only to ourselves. The declaration spread like a shockwave. Humanity had just declared total independence from the Galactic Order, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming next. Back in the core worlds of the Council, news of humanity's response caused a different kind of ripple. The elder races had expected protests, anger, maybe even some posturing. They had not expected humanity to go silent for weeks, and then re-emerge with something terrifying. The first sign that the Terran Coalition was not backing down came when the Trade Guild reported the sudden disappearance of human-built ships from Council-controlled space. Entire fleets of industrial freighters, scientific research vessels, and deep space surveyors had simply vanished. At first, the Council thought this was a retreat, a quiet surrender. They were wrong. On the edge of Council space, in the lawless systems beyond their control, humanity had begun something new. A war machine was being built. For decades, the Council had kept humanity's military potential suppressed, limiting fleet sizes, restricting weapons research, and ensuring no one species could challenge their authority. But now, with those restrictions gone, humanity was free to evolve as they saw fit. And humans, when left to their own devices, had one unparalleled talent. They adapted. No longer shackled by outdated treaties, human engineers began developing new ship designs, ones that ignored the Council's outdated doctrines. Where other species relied on traditional shield generators, humanity pushed forward with kinetic barrier systems, miniaturized warp drives, and self-repairing hull plating. The first prototype Dreadnought rolled off the assembly line 6 months later. It was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Heavily armored, brutally efficient, and armed with weapons that ignored Council-standard defense systems, it was not just a battleship. It was a message that humanity would never be controlled again. And soon, the Council would learn that firsthand. The first sign of humanity's return to the galactic stage wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a fleet parked in orbit over a Council world. It was silence. For months, humanity had withdrawn from the usual interstellar trade routes. Their colonies went dark, communication hubs stopped transmitting, and even black market channels, once filled with human-made goods, dried up overnight. The Council expected this to be the last stage of humanity's defiance, sulking in exile, waiting for an opportunity to beg for re-entry. Instead, something far worse happened. The Council's reliance on human technology became painfully obvious within weeks. Despite their restrictions, humanity had become the backbone of several key industries. Shipbuilding efficiency dropped across multiple core worlds, as human-engineered assembly techniques had been quietly integrated into galactic infrastructure. Automated medical systems, many based on human-developed nanotechnology, began to fail without access to Terran research. Even the simple but effective supply chains built with human efficiency started to break down. It was like a virus had entered the veins of the galaxy, not a biological one, but an economic one. And the true impact had yet to be seen. Deep within a human-controlled system, far beyond the reach of the Council's oversight, an underground military research station floated above the planet of Kessera IV. It was one of dozens of hidden facilities that had emerged in the wake of humanity's exile. Inside, some of the brightest human minds worked without restrictions. No more bureaucratic red tape, no more diplomatic oversight, no more elder species telling them what was ethical or acceptable. Dr. Hadrian Voss, lead scientist of the Experimental Warfare Division, stood in front of a vast display screen, his fingers tracing over complex energy signatures. His audience, military leaders, engineers, and political figures, watched with interest. "We were forced to play by their rules for too long," Voss said, adjusting his glasses. "Forced to suppress our technological advancements, but now?" He smiled. "Now, we can truly evolve." The screen flickered to life, showing a sleek, predatory warship, something unlike the bulky, standardized vessels the Council used. Its hull was dark, designed for stealth. Its weapons systems were unlike anything the Council had ever seen. "We call it the Revenant-class battleship," Voss continued. "It doesn't rely on traditional energy shielding. Instead, it uses an adaptive plating system that absorbs incoming fire and redistributes the energy to its own weapons." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Admiral Tobias Grant leaned forward. "And the prototype?" Voss's grin widened. "Already operational." The first battle wasn't a battle at all. A lone Revenant-class warship entered a Council-controlled system under the cover of darkness. It didn't broadcast any signals. It didn't announce itself. It simply arrived. And then, without warning, an entire Council patrol fleet went dark. No distress calls, no debris, no survivors. The Council's response was immediate, A task force was dispatched to investigate. But when they arrived, all they found was an empty void, no sign of the missing ships. It was the beginning of a terrifying realization. Humanity was no longer fighting for a seat at the table. They were preparing to flip the table over. The council's leaders gathered in an emergency session, their voices raised in panic. The disappearances, the economic disruptions, the growing rumors that humanity had developed weapons far beyond their control. It was all spiraling too fast. "We need to re-establish control," a Zalari ambassador snapped, his long serpentine tail twitching with frustration. "Humanity cannot be allowed to operate outside our oversight." "They're already beyond our oversight," a Vorthon general growled. "We thought we were exiling them. Instead, we've created an enemy that has no reason to hold back." The Speaker of the Council, for the first time in his long life, felt fear. It was no longer a question of whether humanity would return to the galactic stage. It was a question of how much destruction they would leave in their wake when they did. And then, as if the universe itself wanted to answer that question, an alert blared across the chamber. A human fleet had just appeared on the Council's border, not in secrecy, not in hiding. This time, they wanted to be seen. And the message was clear. The exiles had returned. The Council border world of Vena 3 had long been considered an unshakable stronghold. A fortress planet, its orbital defenses were among the most advanced in the galaxy. Shielded stations, anti-ship batteries, and fleets of patrol cruisers ensured that no enemy force could ever breach its defenses. But for all its might, it was built for conventional threats. And humanity was no longer a conventional enemy. The Revenant-class battleships did not arrive in grand formations, nor did they challenge the Council to a fair fight. They didn't need to. Instead, they slipped past long-range sensors like ghosts, their adaptive plating rendering them invisible to traditional scanning technology. When the attack came, it wasn't with a barrage of heavy cannons or fleet engagements. It started with silence. A single warning beacon flickered out. Then another. And another. By the time Vena 3's defense command realized something was wrong, they had already lost half their early warning systems. Admiral Sarek, a hardened veteran of the Council's many wars, stood rigid in the command center, his frilled crest rising in agitation. "Report!" he barked. One of his officers, a pale-skinned Aelari, swallowed hard. "Sir, we're losing contact with our outer patrols. No distress signals, no wreckage, just nothing." Sarek's claws tapped against the console. "No fleet movements? No warp signatures?" The officer hesitated. "There was something. Brief distortions, almost like—" The lights flickered. The sound of Vena 3's orbital alarm screamed through the station. Then the first explosion came, not from outside the station, but from within. Sarek barely had time to register what was happening before the station trembled under a direct impact. The view screens lit up with reports of internal fires, breached corridors, and weapons systems shutting down. "How?" he roared. "Where is the enemy?" No answer came, because the enemy was already inside. Humanity had learned from its wars on Earth, from centuries of asymmetric combat and insurgencies. They knew that brute force wasn't always the answer, that sometimes the best way to destroy an empire wasn't with fleets and armies, it was with precision. The first phase of the attack had been an infiltration. Small, undetectable stealth pods had latched onto key stations in the Vena 3 defense network days before the attack. Elite human operatives, trained in zero-G warfare, had breached the stations in silence, disabling security, planting sabotage charges, and hijacking control systems. By the time the Council fleet realized they were under attack, they were already crippled. The second phase was pure, calculated destruction. With Vena 3's defenses in chaos, the Revenant battleships finally revealed themselves. Their dark hulls shimmered as they dropped their stealth fields, weapons systems coming to life with terrifying efficiency. Instead of firing traditional energy-based weapons, they unleashed hyper-accelerated kinetic rounds, slugs the size of small ships, traveling at near relativistic speeds. Council shielding, designed for plasma and laser warfare, proved useless. Ships were torn apart in seconds, their hulls crumpling like tin under the sheer force of the impacts. Defense stations detonated as precision strikes targeted their reactors. Admiral Sarek could only watch in horror as his unshakable stronghold fell apart piece by piece. And then, the final blow came. A single transmission, broadcast across every channel. Julian Carter's voice. "This is not an invasion. This is not a conquest. This is a reminder." His tone was calm, steady, deadly. "You exiled us. You cast us aside like we were nothing. Now, you will learn what it means to truly be nothing." The transmission cut, and Vena 3's central command station erupted in a fireball that could be seen from orbit. The Council received the news in stunned silence. Vena 3, a fortress world, had been dismantled in a single night. No drawn-out battle, no desperate last stand, just pure, surgical annihilation. For the first time in centuries, the Council leaders realized something terrifying. Humanity was not just returning. They were hunting. And the rest of the galaxy was next. The Galactic Council had never known fear. For thousands of years, they had ruled through diplomacy, trade, and, when necessary, military intervention. The lesser species obeyed, the greater empires coexisted, and the balance of power remained intact. Until now. The attack on Vena 3 had shattered their illusion of control. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Supply lines collapsing, colonies going silent, entire fleets vanishing into the void. The humans weren't waging war like any species before them. They were erasing their enemies before they could even fight back. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, the Council's ruling members sat in grim silence. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of fear and disbelief. The Speaker, his golden carapace dulled with stress, scanned the room. This cannot continue." His voice lacked its usual authority. "We must re-establish control." An Orc Dominion warlord slammed his fist against the table. "Control? Do you understand what we are facing? They are striking without warning? They are fighting like no species we have ever encountered. We need to retaliate before they carve us apart." A Vorthon ambassador bared his fangs. "They fight like cornered animals. We should crush them before they grow bolder." The room erupted into arguments. Some called for all-out war, others for immediate peace talks. But for the first time in history, none of them truly believed they had the upper hand. And then the doors opened. A lone figure entered, a shadow against the grand chandeliers and golden walls of the assembly hall. Admiral Sarek. He was one of the few survivors of Vena 3. His once pristine uniform was torn and burned, his left arm bandaged from plasma burns. He walked with a limp, but his eyes were filled with something even deadlier than pain. Understanding. He knew what they were up against. When he spoke, the entire chamber fell silent. "You think this is a war," he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "It is not." The speaker hesitated. "Then, what is it?" Sarek exhaled, his frilled crest flattened, a sign of weariness. "A reckoning." Across the galaxy, humanity continued its silent conquest. They didn't launch grand invasions. They didn't occupy planets or demand surrender. They simply removed obstacles. Key military outposts fell in single strikes. Supply chains collapsed as human black ops teams sabotaged critical industries. Council spies were fed false information, led into traps, and eliminated before they could report back. The humans weren't just fighting the Council. They were dismantling it, one system at a time. The Revenant-class battleships became the stuff of nightmares. Entire fleets were assigned to track them down, only to disappear without a trace. Their hulls, once thought to be myths, were now recognized by terrified officers, seconds before they were torn apart by kinetic weapons that ignored shields like they were paper. Every fleet lost, every base destroyed, sent a clear message. Humanity was no longer content with survival. They were ascending, and the galaxy could either step aside or be buried. In the depths of space, on an uncharted planet, Julian Carter stood before the leaders of humanity. The underground war council was held beneath the surface of a dead world, far from prying eyes. Around the massive table sat Earth's most powerful figures, military commanders, political leaders, and scientific pioneers who had been freed from the council's shackles. President Evelyn Ward surveyed the room. "The council is weakening," she said, "but they are not yet broken. They still have fleets. They still have allies. And they will not go down quietly." Admiral Tobias Grant leaned forward. "Then we don't give them a chance to scream." Julian smiled. They all knew what had to happen next. The Council had tried to exile humanity, thinking they were removing a problem. Instead, they had created a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And now, the time had come to deliver the final blow. The final war had begun. The Council, once the unchallenged rulers of the galaxy, now stood on the precipice of destruction. Their fleets, once thought invincible, had been shattered. Their political alliances, once unbreakable, had crumbled under the weight of humanity's relentless campaign. And now, the Terran coalition was ready to deliver the death blow. The Council's remaining forces gathered at the capital world of Xiphos Prime. It was the heart of the Galactic government, the seat of power that had ruled for thousands of years. A fortress planet protected by orbital defense grids, planetary shields, and the last great fleets of the elder races. If humanity wanted to end this war, they would have to break Xiphos Prime. But they had no intention of engaging in a prolonged siege. They had something better. Above the darkened surface of an unnamed moon, the Terran fleet assembled. It was unlike any fleet the galaxy had ever seen. No more outdated Council-approved ships. No more restrictions on military technology. This was humanity, unleashed. Sleek, black warships lined the void, their hulls humming with energy. Dreadnoughts bristling with railguns capable of firing rounds at near-light speeds. Experimental stealth cruisers designed to vanish from sensors even in the middle of battle. Strike carriers loaded with boarding pods, their payloads carrying the deadliest soldiers ever trained. And at the center of it all, the flagship of the fleet, the Revenant Prime. Julian Carter stood on the command deck, staring at the holographic display of Xiphos Prime. "We end this tonight," he said, his voice calm, determined. "No speeches, no negotiations. The Council didn't give us a second chance. We won't give them one either." The order was given. Humanity moved. The Council's final fleet, battered but determined, formed a defensive perimeter around Xiphos Prime. Hundreds of capital ships, thousands of fighters, all standing between the planet and annihilation. But it wouldn't be enough. The battle began with a silence that was deafening. Then, in a single moment, chaos erupted. Human warships descended upon the enemy like predators in the night. The Revenant-class battleships unleashed kinetic rounds so fast they ignored traditional shielding, tearing through enemy hulls like paper. Human strike teams infiltrated command stations, shutting down defenses before the enemy even knew they were breached. The Council's forces fought back desperately, but for every human ship destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. And then, the final phase began. Julian's voice echoed across the battlefield. "Deploy the hammer." From the depths of space, a single warship emerged. It was unlike any human vessel before it. It was the culmination of every piece of stolen Council technology, every experiment deemed too dangerous, every advancement humanity had been forced to suppress. It was the Hammer of Terra, a mobile weapons platform capable of focusing the energy of an entire star into a single devastating strike. As it locked onto Xiphos Prime, the Council leaders realized the truth. This wasn't just an attack. This was extinction. Panic spread through the Council chambers. Some begged for mercy, some tried to flee, others simply collapsed into silence, understanding that their reign had come to an end. Julian Carter gave them no quarter. The hammer fired. The skies of Xiphos Prime burned. The planet, once the heart of the galaxy's greatest empire, was reduced to nothing but fire and ash. The war was over. The Council was no more. Humanity had been cast out, exiled, betrayed. Now they ruled the galaxy, and the stars would never forget the price of their vengeance. The war had ended. The Galactic Council was no more. Xiphos Prime, once the beating heart of the galaxy's rulers, was nothing but a smoldering ruin, an eternal monument to humanity's wrath. The surviving members of the elder races, those who had not perished in the fires, scattered like insects fleeing a broken nest. But humanity had no interest in extermination. They had made their point. Now they would build something new. In the aftermath of the war, the stars fell silent. For centuries, the Council had been the unshakable authority of the galaxy, dictating laws, shaping empires, deciding the fates of entire civilizations. Their word had been absolute. Now, their banners lay in the dust. What took their place was not another empire, nor a dictatorship. It was the Terran Dominion, and it was built upon one simple truth. Humanity alone would decide the fate of the galaxy. Across the known systems, the shift in power was immediate and absolute. The old trade routes, once controlled by Council bureaucrats, now fell under the iron grip of the Dominion. No goods moved, no ships flew, no colonies thrived unless they did so under humanity's watchful eye. Some species, broken and desperate, surrendered without question. They had seen what happened to those who defied humanity, and they would not make the same mistake. Others, still clinging to the shattered remnants of the old order, attempted to resist. They were erased. No mercy, no negotiations. The Council had taught humanity that weakness invited betrayal. Humanity would never be weak again. On Earth, in the heart of the Dominion's capital, Julian Carter stood in the grand chamber of what was once the Terran Coalition's War Council. Now, it was something far greater. It was the seat of power for the most dominant force the galaxy had ever known. President Evelyn Ward sat at the head of the new Dominion government. She was no longer a mere politician. She was the ruler of a civilization that had reshaped the fate of entire species. Admiral Tobias Grant stood at her side, overseeing the expansion of the Dominion's fleets. The Revenant-class warships were no longer just tools of vengeance. Now, they were instruments of control, patrolling the stars, ensuring humanity's rule remained unchallenged. Julian himself had been offered a position in this new order, Supreme Chancellor of Galactic Affairs. The title meant nothing to him. Only the outcome mattered. He had seen what the Council had done to humanity. He had ensured they would never do it again. And now, as he looked upon the map of the known galaxy, one final question remained. What came next? Not everyone accepted humanity's rule. Scattered across the stars, remnants of the old Council still plotted in the shadows, hidden enclaves, rogue admirals, desperate leaders, those who refused to submit. They whispered of resistance. They dreamed of vengeance. But humanity had already foreseen this, and they had one final message for those who dared to challenge the new order. A single broadcast, sent to every remaining faction, every hidden world, every shadow of rebellion. Julian Carter's voice, calm and unyielding. We gave you peace. You gave us war. We gave you trust. You gave us exile. We gave you mercy. You gave us betrayal. A pause. You wanted us gone. You wanted us erased. You wanted us forgotten. A cold, quiet chuckle. Now you will never forget us. The transmission ended, and across the galaxy, the survivors of the old era realized the truth. The war had not ended. It had only just begun. Decades passed. The galaxy, once ruled by the arrogance of the elder races, now bore the mark of humanity's reign. The Terran dominion stretched from one end of known space to the other, an empire forged not through diplomacy, but through fire and vengeance. The last remnants of the old council had been hunted down. Some had fled to the uncharted edges of the galaxy, clinging to the desperate hope that humanity's reach would not extend that far. Others had attempted to rebuild in secret, gathering in hidden enclaves, whispering of rebellion. But there was no rebellion. There was no uprising. There was only the Dominion. Earth was no longer just the birthplace of humanity. It was the core of civilization itself. What had once been a planet of warring nations and fragile alliances was now the most fortified world in the galaxy, a symbol of absolute power. The skies above it were crowded with warships, orbital platforms, and defense grids so impenetrable that no force could ever hope to lay siege to it. In the halls of the Dominion's capital, Julian Carter stood upon a balcony, overlooking the great city that had risen from the ashes of humanity's past. He was older now. The years of war had left their mark. His hair had grayed, his face was lined with the weight of the choices he had made. But there was no regret. He had done what needed to be done. Beside him, President Evelyn Ward remained as calculating as ever. She had guided humanity through war, through conquest, through ascension. And now, she guided it into an era where humanity was untouchable. Admiral Tobias Grant, though no longer a man of war, still commanded the fleets that patrolled the galaxy's farthest reaches. His forces ensured that the Dominion's rule remained undisputed. Humanity had achieved something no species had ever done before. They had become gods. And yet, Julian could not ignore the whispers. There were those who feared what humanity had become. Not the remnants of the Council, those had been crushed long ago, but within humanity itself. There were those who remembered a time before the Dominion, a time when humanity had fought not for dominance, but for survival, a time when they had dreamed of unity, not conquest. The Dominion had brought order. But at what cost? Cities gleamed under artificial suns. Planets thrived under humanity's control. But fear ruled the stars. No one dared oppose humanity, not because they agreed with them, but because they knew what happened to those who did. And in the darkest corners of the galaxy, in the lawless systems beyond the Dominion's reach, something began to stir. Not an army, not a fleet. A question. Had humanity won? Or had it lost itself in the process? Julian Carter stood in his chamber, staring at the stars beyond Earth's skies. He had fought for humanity's place in the galaxy. He had won. But as he looked at the vast empire they had built, he found himself wondering. Had they simply become the new council? The very thing they had once fought against? A shadow passed across his reflection in the window. Evelyn Ward stood behind him, her voice quiet but firm. "You feel it too," she said. It wasn't a question. Julian exhaled. "We built something unbreakable." "Yes. But is it right?" For the first time in years, Evelyn did not have an answer. Silence stretched between them. Then the door chimed. A message had arrived, not from a Dominion world, not from an ally, from the unknown, a new voice, a new power rising in the darkness, and for the first time since humanity's exile, Julian Carter felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Uncertainty. The cycle was not over. History was not finished. The future was calling. And humanity would have to decide what kind of gods they truly wished to be.